أنا بحبه على اليمين، عارف تحطه على الشمال. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. So as we talked last week, inshallah, we're going to start a series around Surah Luqman. And Surah Luqman is a very special surah where Allah talks about Sayyidina Luqman and the advice that he gives to his son. So inshallah, we're going to use the next couple of weeks diving more into the advice of Sayyidina Luqman that he gives to his son and trying to extract some learnings for all of us, which I think is very relevant, particularly in the time that we live in now. But before we dive into that advice, a couple of things around Surah Luqman that we will touch on today, inshallah, and then the first ayat before the advice comes in, just so that we all have the same context that Allah puts us in. So Surah Luqman, first and foremost, it's the surah number 31 in the Quran. It has 34 ayat, and it's predominantly a Makki surah. So when you look at the scholars, they say most of the ayat of Surah Luqman, if not all of them, were revealed in Mecca. Some scholars say that a couple of ayat were revealed in Medina, but most of the surah was revealed in Mecca. When you think of the timing where this surah was revealed in, most scholars say this was revealed after Isra and Mi'raj and before Hijrah. So think about it like the last 2 years or so before the Hijrah of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So I want you to have that mindset and the context of how things were for the Muslims before you listen to the ayat of the surah, because it helps you really be in context, understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in this surah. So again, like 2 years before the Hijrah, the Muslims were weak, were few in numbers. The disbelievers in Mecca thought that they had everything under control, and basically their focus is to make sure nobody outside of Mecca hears about the message. So the ayat go a little bit through some of that. So the first 5 ayat, subhanAllah, very much like Surah Al-Baqarah, by the way. The surah starts with Alif Lam Mim, like Surah Al-Baqarah, and the first 5 ayat talk about the believers. And it gives descriptions of the believers, and actually it goes very much in similarity like the description of Surah Al-Baqarah, with the 5th ayah being exactly the same. Now there are some subtle differences. We won't go through all of them or even many of them, just given the time. But when you understand the context that this surah is a Makki surah and that Surah Al-Baqarah is a Madani surah, you're going to start to appreciate some of those subtle differences, how Allah was speaking to the Muslims in Mecca and how the speech was in Medina. So for example, one of them, Allah says, الَّذِينَ يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ. Before that, Allah says, تِلْكَ آيَاتُ الْكِتَابِ الْحَكِيمِ. First of all, we're going to talk about Luqman. And Luqman is somebody that was given wisdom. So a very interesting thing is that Allah defines the Quran in Surah Luqman as تِلْكَ آيَاتُ الْكِتَابِ الْحَكِيمِ. These are the verses of the book that has wisdom. Allah is giving us something to think about, that if you actually want to have wisdom, like Luqman, then focus on the Quran. Get it from the Quran. This is the book that has that wisdom. But then Allah says, هُدًى وَرَحْمَةً لِلْمُحْسِنِينَ. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Because remember, there were more people. So this was guidance to the pious in Medina. In Mecca, there were few people, but those were steadfast. They were tested. Particularly before the surah was revealed, they were tested for like 10 years. So these were a higher level. These were more the muhsineen. And it's not just guidance for them, it's also mercy for them. It's mercy for them. So anyways, we won't go through them because of the time, but the first 5 ayat, very much like Surah Al-Baqarah, talks about the believers. The second 2 ayat, also like Surah Al-Baqarah, talks about the disbelievers. Very much the same construct. The second 2 ayat, like ayah 6 and 7, talk about the disbelievers. But here it's very interesting. Here when Allah describes the disbelievers, Allah talks about the people that are trying to make others not hear the message of Islam. Because this was the strategy of the non-believers back then. They thought they had control over the Muslims, and their whole goal was, let's make sure all the tribes that come during Hajj and others from outside of Mecca don't hear the message of Islam. So they were trying to distract them. So Allah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Now let's focus on this one, because subhanAllah, this is exactly what happens nowadays. By the way, the similarities of the era of Mecca, because I know we all try to jump to Medina and think about like when the Muslim community was built, and the similarities of the era of Mecca, particularly the last couple of years, with the similarities that we're going through now, is so similar that we should extract a lot of lessons. We should really try to focus on this era and understand some of the stuff that was happening there. But anyways, this is a very profound ayah. Allah says that there are some people that actually يشتروا لهو الحديث. A lot of explanation from the scholars on what was going on, but they were basically using music, using poetry, using things that will just distract people from listening to the message. When Prophet Muhammad was trying to portray the message, they would get, in one narration, dancers in the street to distract people. They would get poets in the street to distract people. They just want to distract people. Now, think about our life now. How many people have kids that play video games? That's distracting people. How many people themselves listen to music? That's distracting people. How many people do all this gaming stuff and like all the cinemas and all that? That's distracting people. These have become industries of distraction. The whole goal is to take our free time and distract us from using it in any way that is wise. That's what Allah is describing in this era. That these were people that were just trying to distract folks so they don't listen to the proper message. That's what we have now. Industries, most of the social media is distraction of people. I'm not saying all of it, some of it is very useful, but most of it is distraction of people. So Allah is explaining to us so that we can think about it and apply it to our life now. That these back then, the non-believers, their strategy was, let's distract the people from the message. Exactly what's happening now. Now it's just bigger industries and a lot more money behind it to distract all of us, believers and non-believers, from just focusing and thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the two ayat. And then it goes by saying, because there will be the struggle, and it's going to continue until the end of time, that there will be some believers and there will be people that distract the believers, and it's easy to get distracted. So Allah gives us the price. Allah says the people who actually stick with the belief are going to get paradise, and it's going to be forever. So don't allow those distractions for a couple of years to distract you personally from the real goal, which is the hereafter and paradise. And then Allah beautifully talks about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is in all, most, perhaps surah, perhaps not all, of the surah of Mecca, the Makki surah. Allah talks about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in that one specifically, for example, we're just talking about distractions. Allah actually talks about His oneness subhanahu wa ta'ala the way we see it in the creation around us. If you want to get distracted with Allah's creation, because you're going to know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're going to learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah says, خَلَقَ السَّمَوَاتِ بِغَيْرِ عَمَدٍ تَرَوْنَهَا. Look at the skies. Allah has created them without anything holding them. Allah talks about وَأَلْقَى فِي الْأَرْضِ رَوَاسِيَ أَن تَمِيدَ بِكُمْ وَبَثَّ فِيهَا مِنْ كُلِّ دَابَّةٍ وَأَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. So Allah talks about the creation of Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if you want to get distracted, if you want to consume your time, if you have free time, go out and look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how to get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rather than getting distracted with fictitious stuff. And then Allah emphasizes that point by saying, هَذَا خَلْقُ اللَّهِ. This is Allah's creation. You want to wonder about what's going on? Look at Allah's creation, the real stuff. فَأَرُونِي مَاذَا خَلَقَ الَّذِينَ مِن دُونِهِ. Show me what the others have done. All the cyber stuff, all the stuff that is not real, that's not real creation. So Allah is telling you, if you want to get distracted, if you want to use your time somehow, then look at Allah's creation subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then in this, these are the first 11 ayat. By the way, we just skimmed through them very quickly. But then Allah tells us something very profound, or at least makes us think about something very profound. Because then in ayat 12, Allah immediately puts in the advice of Luqman. And you have to think, what does that have to do with everything that we were talking about? And one of the strong linkages that you can see is that because of the level of distraction and because everything that is going on around us, now Allah is telling us each one of us has an individual responsibility. And that individual responsibility starts with our family. And it starts with advising our family. Because there will always be the few believers and there will always be the significant distractions. And Allah is true subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the hereafter is true. And we can see everything in Allah's creation subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is saying, now it's your responsibility. Each one of us is responsibility to advise our families, advise our kids, and make sure they are not fully distracted, but they actually know who's their creator, who they should worship, and what they should focus on in this life. And this is basically where Luqman's advice starts to come in for his son, and that's what we're going to discuss inshallah in the next couple of times. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show us the right path, keep us steadfast on the right path, make us connected to him subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he created, and see him through his creation subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make us not get distracted with all the distractions that are around us. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. ربنا اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في فلسطين. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في فلسطين. اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في فلسطين. اللهم إنا نسألك من خير ما سألك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، ونعوذ بك من شر ما استعاذك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله عليه وسلم.